Alrighty, so this is going to be part 2 of Unit 10, Lesson 4. Now, we're going to continue doing the exact same problems from the last lesson, except there's a little bit of a twist now, where it's not going to tell us which quadrant our triangle is located in. So if you look at the following problem, it says tangent of x is equal to negative 20 over 21. And then secant is less than 0, find sine of x. Okay, so they completely left out which quadrant I'm supposed to start drawing my picture in. So for a problem like this, that's the very first thing I need to problem solve, is where is this located? Which quadrant is it? And thankfully they give us a couple of clues that we can use to piece together to figure out the quadrant, okay? So one thing that we're looking for here is we can tell which quadrant something is located in depending on if the sine, the cosine, and the tangent are negative or positive, okay? So here's one of the first clues. Tangent of x equals negative 20 over 21, so tangent is negative. So some quadrant, or tangent, is negative. And they also told us something else, that secant is less than 0. Well, we know that numbers that are less than 0 are negative, so secant is also negative. Now, here in this diagram, we're not given secant, we just have sine, cosine, and tangent. But you may recall from the very last lesson, okay, that sine, cosine, and tangent, okay, are all of our normal trig functions. If we look at the reciprocal functions, so for example, cosecant, secant, and cotangent, they're going to follow the exact same pattern depending on the quadrant they're in, okay? So if this is positive, negative, negative, the reciprocal functions are going to follow in suit. They'll be exactly the same. So remember, they're all positive here. And we can kind of just quickly review the trick for figuring out what is positive and negative in each quadrant, okay? So all students take calculus. Okay, all students take calculus. So this is a little acronym you can use to help you remember that all of the trig functions are positive here. Sine is the only one that's positive here, and so therefore cosecant, because it's the reciprocal, that's going to be positive. Okay, so sine's the only one that's positive. Here, tangent is the only one that's positive, as well as its reciprocal. And cosine is the only one that's positive, as well as its reciprocal, secant, okay? So really when we're using this table on the back, so this page, okay, I didn't write the reciprocals because the reciprocals are going to be the same thing as their normal trig function, okay? So we just have to remember which reciprocal matches up to which correct trig function. So I think it's pretty easy to remember that cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. What gets mixed up a little bit more is sine. Is that the reciprocal of secant or cosecant, okay? So if you maybe can think of writing something like this, like sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, cotangent, okay? Just this little thing, if you can remember, memorize that, that'll always tell you what the correct reciprocal is. So sine, the reciprocal is cosecant. Cosine, the reciprocal is secant, okay? So whatever trick you use to memorize that, remember that those are the correct reciprocals. So here, when I'm given secant, okay, so backing up to this problem, really all I care about is knowing what's happening with its reciprocal, okay? So let's see, its reciprocal is cosine. So if secant's negative, cosine should be negative too, and we can know that for sure, again, from this last table, because whatever the reciprocal is, it should be the same thing. Okay, so somewhere secant is negative, right? Cosine is also negative. Where secant's negative, cosine's also negative. Okay, so let's just write this as cosine. So we just work with our three basic trig functions. So if you ever encounter a reciprocal, change it to its normal trig function, okay? And that's what we'll use to figure out which quadrant it's in. So those are the clues that we were given, okay? Tangent's negative and cosine is negative. So which quadrant is that happening in? okay? So if you remember that acronym, all students take calculus, we can pretty clearly see here that quadrant 2 is going to be the answer to that problem, okay? Sine is positive here, and cosine and tangent are negative, okay? So here, I know that I'm going to use quadrant 2, okay? So let's go ahead and draw our triangle in quadrant 2. So there's our angle. Right now we're using an x, and according to this tangent that they thankfully gave to us, we can figure out where these go on the triangle. Remember, tangent is opposite over adjacent, okay? So this is the opposite side, 20. Remember, put the negative on at the very end, okay? So we'll save the negative there. We know that there's going to be a negative somewhere, but just wait till the end to put it. And then the adjacent side is 21. So here, now I can evaluate and see where the negative goes. Is it going to go on the side that has 20 or 21? So if you think 21, you're correct, okay? Because this is going, if you think about this as the x-axis, this is the positive side of the x-axis, and this is the negative side of the x-axis. So it makes sense that this is negative 21, okay? All right, and then we can do a little bit of problem solving to figure out what the hypotenuse is going to be. Alrighty, so if you're getting 29 as your hypotenuse, that is correct. Alright, so now that I've figured out all the sides of this triangle, and I know which quadrant it's in, now I get to do the part where I find sine of angle x. So I get to find sine of this angle. So sine is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. So this is the opposite. That's the hypotenuse of this triangle according to this angle x. So the sine of angle x is going to be 20 over 29. And that is our answer. So let's try this one more time with another problem. So here, they told us that cosecant of x is equal to negative square root of 3, and that cosine is greater than 0. What is tangent? Okay. All right, so let's piece together our clues to figure out which quadrant this is in. So they told us that cosecant is negative, and that cosine is greater than 0. So numbers that are greater than 0 are positive. So cosine is positive. So remember, before I turn to this and start figuring it out, I want to change any reciprocal functions to their normal trig function. So what's the reciprocal of cosecant? Okay, that would be sine. So if cosecant's negative, you just learned the rule that the reciprocal should be negative as well. So sine will also be negative. All right, so now we can turn over here and see where, which quadrant has sine is negative and cosine is positive. So sine negative, there we go, quadrant 4, okay? So sine is negative, cosine is positive. Wonderful, so now I can draw my triangle in quadrant 4. Angle x is here, and hold on here, so cosecant. So they gave me cosecant is equal to negative square root of 3 already. Well, I know that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, right? So sine. So I know that sine, okay, if I'm using SOHCAHTOA, sine has the sides O over H. Okay, so if you remember how cosecant works, cosecant uses those same sides, but they're flipped upside down, okay? So it's going to be H over O. Now, this isn't a fraction right now, but we can make it a fraction and then compare the sides here. So technically, there is an invisible 1 that's underneath this. And again, since this is the reciprocal, okay, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, this should be H over O. Okay, this is the hypotenuse, and that would be the opposite side. Alrighty, so there's our information, so we can start labeling the triangle. So our hypotenuse is, again, we'll wait for the negative till the very end, so it's going to be the square root of 3. And then the opposite side is 1. All right, so if you recall from the last lesson, I told you that the hypotenuse is never negative. Okay, so we can write it like this. The hypotenuse is always positive. So if that's the case, the negative is going to go over to the 1. There's our negative, and that also makes sense because on the y-axis, these are the positive numbers, on the y-axis, these are the negative numbers, so it makes sense that that is -1. And then the only thing we have to do is do the Pythagorean theorem for that missing side. So if you did this correctly, you should be getting the square root of 2, and I can check and make sure, okay, that's definitely a positive square root of 2, because this is part of the positive numbers on the x-axis, okay? All right, so my triangle is completely filled in now, so I can go ahead and find the tangent of angle x. So according to x, this would be my opposite, and this is my adjacent. So I have -1 over the square root of 2. And then please make sure we're rationalizing the denominator. So I don't want a radical in the denominator. I need to get rid of the square root in the denominator, and this is something we learned back in Unit 4, but if you forgot how to do this, to get rid of the square root in the denominator, I just multiply by that square root. I multiply the denominator by it, and I multiply the numerator by it. So if I do that, I multiply straight across, so negative square root of 2, and then the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 just makes positive 2, okay? Because you can think of those two things being multiplied together, so there's 2 of them. So another way I can write this is, since there's 2 of them, that's the square root of 2 squared. That cancels out, so that just makes 2, a positive 2. So that would be my final answer. So the tangent of angle x is negative square root of 2 divided by 2. Alrighty, so the very last thing we're going to do is looking at these 2 trig functions. So we're given the value of the following 2 trig functions. We need to find the other 4, okay? So once again, we're not told the quadrant, so what we're going to have to do, given these pieces of information, is figure out first what quadrant we're dealing with. So here, cotangent is negative, and cosine is positive. So remember, if I ever have a reciprocal, I want to change it back to its normal trig function. So the reciprocal of cotangent would be tangent. So wherever cotangent is negative, tangent is negative as well, okay? So which trig quadrant is that happening in? So tangent's negative, cosine is positive. Looks like here. So yeah, tangent's negative and cosine is positive. So quadrant 4. So let's go ahead and draw our triangle again. And again, angle x is here. And we can use either one of these to start filling out the triangle. Let's use cosine just for fun. So cosine, we know, is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse, okay? So 20 is our adjacent side, and the hypotenuse is 29, okay? And they're both positive, that makes sense. That should always be positive, and this is in the positive x direction. So cotangent, remember tangent is opposite over adjacent. So cotangent is that, but it flipped upside down, so it's going to be adjacent over adjacent over opposite, okay? So adjacent side, yep, that makes sense that this is adjacent, and then the opposite side is 21. And that negative is definitely going to go to the 21, so that's going down. That's where all the y values are negative, okay? It's below the x-axis. So there's our triangle filled out, and now we can use that to figure out all the 4 trig functions that we're missing. So let's see, we're missing sine, tangent x, tangent of x, secant, and secant. All right, so let's start with sine. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So that's going to be negative 21 over 29. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent, so negative 21 over 20. All right, so cosecant, remember this is the reciprocal of sine. So I just take this and flip it upside down. So 29 over negative 21. And secant, that's just the reciprocal of cosine. So I flip that upside down. All right, so there are our other 4 trig functions. And that is the end of part 2, Unit 10, Lesson 4.